The feast was a beautiful lie, and the first glass of wine was always a toast to your own silence. You are a Roman senator, draped in fine wool. The scent of roasted meat and exotic spices fills the palace hall. Your wife sits beside you, her smile perfectly still. Your daughter, barely a woman, fidgets with the hem of her stola just across the table. Every powerful man in the empire is here, laughing, drinking, pretending. And then the emperor rises. He does not speak. He simply walks, past the consuls, past the generals. He stops directly behind your child. His hand touches her shoulder. He leans and whispers not to her but to you. The room does not stir. No one gasps, because every man here has already learned the terrible lesson you are learning now. To speak is to die. So you smile, you nod, you watch her walk away with him. And when she returns, her eyes hollow, you pour more wine. You have just been taught that Rome does not care what you see, only what you are willing to forget. This isn't the history of statues and speeches. This is the history of what happened in the shadows of the Palatine, a system of terror so complete it turned Rome's greatest men into willing accomplices. It was a conspiracy of silence so vast, it wasn't a conspiracy at all. It was just the new order. If you think this is about one mad emperor, you're missing the real horror. The records they hoped we'd never piece together tell a different story. They reveal a blueprint for control that is far more disturbing than the actions of any single tyrant. So stay, because Black Whisper is about to pull back the curtain and show you the machinery behind the monster. In the year 37 AD, Gaius Caesar, nicknamed Caligula, took power. Rome didn't just get a new ruler, it embraced a living legend, the son of a national hero. His father was Germanicus, a military idol mourned by millions. His bloodline traced back directly to the divine Augustus. When the grim emperor Tiberius finally died, the Senate didn't deliberate. They rushed to offer everything to the young man they affectionately called Little Boots, a childhood nickname from his days in army camps. The city erupted in joy, a collective sigh of relief after years of oppressive rule. Political prisoners were freed, lavish games were funded, taxes were cut. For 7 glorious months, it felt like a new golden age had dawned over the empire. Hope was not just a feeling, it was the official policy of Rome. Then disaster. A violent, unexplained fever seized the new emperor. The empire held its breath, paralyzed with fear. And when he recovered, he was not the same man. The personality, the temperament, the very soul of the emperor had been shattered and remade into something unrecognizable. Ancient sources all agree something fundamental broke inside of him during that illness, but none can provide a definitive answer. Was it encephalitis, a traumatic brain injury from the fever itself? Poison from a hidden enemy? We'll never know for certain. What matters is the man who woke up in the imperial bed was a stranger now wearing a god's crown, and he expected the world to worship him. Within weeks, the transformation was complete. He declared himself a living god, demanding temples built in his honor. He forced elderly senators, men of immense dignity, to run like common slaves behind his chariot for miles until they collapsed. He commanded a preposterous floating bridge to be built across the Bay of Baiae, miles long, constructed from hundreds of supply ships, just so he could ride across it wearing the breastplate of Alexander the Great. A stunt that crippled the grain supply, and most significantly, he perverted the imperial banquet from a coveted political privilege into a blunt instrument of psychological warfare. Attendance was not a polite request. The summons was clear. The emperor requests your presence. Bring your wife. Bring your daughters if they are of age. Refusal was an unspoken death sentence for you and your entire house. So they came. The halls were vast, the couches arranged by strict status, the wine and delicacies endless. And Caligula would watch. Not the acrobats, not the musicians. He studied the women, his gaze a palpable weight in the room. He would stare openly at a senator's wife, then comment on her figure or her features loud enough for her humiliated husband to hear, a subtle gesture to a servant. A quiet command. The woman would stand, her face a mask, and without a word, follow an attendant out of the hall. And the most chilling part, the banquet would continue without pause. Conversations resumed, laughter echoed. No one would dare acknowledge what had just transpired. To acknowledge it was to be forced to choose a side. In that room, objection was not an act of bravery, it was a signed confession, a warrant for your own extinction. This was not a hidden vice. It was a public, almost bureaucratic, ritual of domination. Historians like Suetonius and Cassius Dio recorded it plainly. Wives were formally summoned for honor, only to be examined like livestock in a market. Their husbands were sometimes compelled to witness the entire degrading process. Afterwards, Caligula might return to the feast and openly critique the experience in front of the entire assembly. Why this specific theatrical brutality? Why this cruel spectacle? It served a cold, brilliant political purpose. The palace kept meticulous lists. Imperial secretaries noted who attended, who brought which family members. Your very presence at the feast, your continued silence, made you complicit. It bought your temporary safety. You were no longer merely a witness to a crime, you were a participant, an accessory. This system was designed to isolate every single man, to sever the bonds of trust between Rome's elite. You couldn't confide in your neighbor because he might be rewarded tomorrow for his compliance while you were punished. Survival became a solitary, paranoid game, and perversely, some families didn't just comply out of fear, they began to play the game strategically, to monetize their humiliation. The philosopher Seneca tells us of Lollia Paulina, who arrived at the palace not in simple garments, but draped in a fortune of emeralds and pearls. This was not an act of defiance, but a calculated advertisement. In this twisted new economy, being chosen by the emperor could be spun as a mark of high political favor, a perverse social capital. Ambitious fathers began to view their daughters' attention from the emperor as a tangible marital asset, something to be negotiated in marriage contracts. The unspeakable was being quietly institutionalized, written into the legal and social fabric of the elite. The enforcers of this system were the Praetorian Guard. They stood at every palace door. They provided the escort to and from the emperor's private chambers. They saw everything. And they said nothing, because Caligula had doubled their pay. Their loyalty was purchased by gold, not by duty to Rome. But even a bought man has his pride, and the humiliation eventually dripped down to touch them too. A decorated officer named Cassius Chaerea, a veteran hardened in real battle, was forced to endure vulgar, emasculating passwords and relentless public mockery from the emperor he was sworn to protect. His pride, the core of a Roman soldier, finally snapped. The conspiracy that formed wasn't some grand, widespread plot. It was small, desperate, and born of sheer, exhausted disgust. The end came on January 24, 41 AD, during a break in the Palatine Games. In a secluded, dimly lit palace corridor, they ambushed him. Chaerea's blade struck the first, decisive blow from behind. Then others joined, a storm of pent-up violence. The emperor, who believed himself an invincible god, fell under 30 savage blows. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath, his wife and his infant daughter were also murdered. A brutal, final erasure of his bloodline and any chance of future vengeance. When the shocking news reached the Senate, they actually, for a few breathtaking hours, debated restoring the Republic. They dreamed aloud of elections, of shared power, of freedom from the imperial yoke. But dreams don't pay soldiers. While they debated, the Praetorian Guard acted. They found Caligula's stammering, bookish uncle, Claudius, hiding behind a palace curtain in fear for his life. They declared him emperor on the spot. He promised them a colossal cash reward, the largest donative in history. The Senate, utterly powerless without military backing, confirmed Claudius's rule that very same day. The Republic wasn't just dead, it was revealed to have been a ghost for years. The assassins, expecting praise as liberators, were swiftly dealt with. Claudius, needing to project stability, had Chaerea and his fellows executed. Rome's powerful class had made its choice clear. They wanted predictable order, not dangerous justice. And what became of the women, the central figures in this entire horror? Lollia Paulina survived the reign, only to be exiled and later forced to kill herself years later on the orders of a jealous new empress. Most, however, simply vanish from all historical record. Their names are scrubbed from family trees and public inscriptions. Their faces disappear from the lineage. Were they quietly exiled to distant estates? Did they take their own lives out of shame or despair? We see only the gaps they left behind, the eerie silence in the archives. Officially, Rome performed a damnatio memoria on Caligula, condemning his memory to oblivion, striking his name from monuments. But this ritual erasure wasn't for the victims. It was to bury, forever, the uncomfortable question of mass, collective complicity. If Caligula could be framed as a lone, temporary monster, then Rome itself, its senate, its aristocracy, bore no lasting blame. They could tell themselves the system was sound, it was just the man who was rotten. This was the ultimate fiction. Silence wasn't a collective failure of courage, it was the empire's deliberate, architectural design. This dark pattern, it's crucial to understand, did not begin or end with him. It was a thread woven deep into the purple fabric of the Principate. Tiberius before him had his private villa of unspeakable horrors on Capri. Nero after him would host similarly degrading feasts, assaulting senators' wives as a form of dinner theatre. Commodus Elagabalus, the grotesque list stretches on for centuries. Caligula's reign was not an anomaly, it was simply the moment the gilded mask fell completely off, revealing the grimacing metal underneath. The system was always there, waiting. Augustus created the permanently paid Praetorian Guard, making the army loyal to the emperor's purse, not the state. Tiberius moved treason trials from public courts into secret, imperial hearings, destroying legal transparency. Caligula didn't invent the machinery, he simply showed what it could do when operated without a shred of restraint, subtlety, or pretend morality. His bloody assassination didn't reform the empire or dismantle this machinery. It just taught the next emperor, Claudius, and everyone after him, to be more discreet, to oil the gears of terror more quietly. The palace remained. The banquets continued. The underlying power structure, where the ruler held absolute power over the bodies and dignities of his subjects, never changed. The real, chilling truth we must confront is this: Rome's elite, her so-called best men, ultimately accepted and functioned within this horror because the system was meticulously engineered to make resistance seem infinitely more terrifying than compliance. It systematically convinced powerful men that their personal dignity and even their own families were a fair and acceptable price to pay for their continued status, wealth, and survival. And the women, the wives and daughters, their stolen testimony, their erased pain, became the foundational price for Rome's so-called peace and stability. Their stories are the permanent ghosts in the archive, the echoing empty spaces on the parchment where history ought to be. We have the sources. The fragments are there, scattered in Suetonius, Dio, and Seneca, but they are presented to us not as evidence of an engineered system of control, but as salacious anecdotes about a madman's excesses. This is the final, masterful trick of history to take systemic evil and rebrand it as personal insanity. So the question for us today is not simply why one particular emperor was cruel. The deeper, more unsettling question is why an entire advanced civilization, its most educated and powerful class, made a conscious, ongoing decision to look away, to meticulously document the horror, and then to collectively pretend it was merely a temporary anomaly. If uncovering the histories that were built on forced silence and institutionalized forgetting matters to you, then you are in the right place. Black Whisper exists to listen for those ghosts, to give voice to the empty spaces. Before you go, if this journey into the dark heart of imperial power made you see the past, and perhaps the mechanics of power itself, in a new light, do us a favor and hit the like button. It truly helps more independent seekers find channels like ours that are committed to digging deeper, beyond the simplified stories. Thank you for watching Winds of Thought.